Right, so that was Elias Sitzkliver, who's one of the brains behind AI development. And Dr. Imtiaz, I'm sure you'll recognize him. He's one of the developers behind what we see today as modern AI and one of the co-founders of OpenAI. And I think that when you listen to that, it can seem very out there. And one of those sayings, which is hopelessly cliched, and hopefully the only cliche that I'll say today, is that technology typically moves slower than you expect in the short term, and much faster than you expect in the long term, right? And so if you look at that and you look back, I think it's instructive to look at the changes that we've seen that have already come before. And I've been around long enough to have lived through the dot-com revolution. And I was head of Gemini Consulting's e-business unit at the time. And at the time, I mean, those of you who lived through that will recognize a lot of the hype that we might see today. And might even look at that and say, you know, that sounds like hype, right? But if you look back and you say it's been a relatively short period of 20 years, what's happened to entire industries like the media industry? It's been completely revolutionized. We do not have newspapers as we used to have them. TV has changed. Media has fundamentally changed. And it's interesting when I compare my interaction with the heads of the insurers, the life insurers, etc., at the time in the early 2000s, and some of the things that they feared about what was going to happen, and how those are coming up again in the context of AI. So robo-advice is not new, but it's something that we were talking about in the 2000s, right? But with the context of AI, it changes completely. And so that experience is important, and it's really important, I think, to draw on what we have experienced and recognize that in what we see going forward. It's not all new. Revolutions they follow a pattern. And so let's look at that. So who am I? I've lived from the journey of where this was just a stochastic parrot, right? It just repeats what it's told and the information it's given. And then I saw the application of AI about 2 years ago in workflows, and what that inference capability was capable of when it was within a deterministic framework, right? And that really opened my eyes as to what was coming. There were things that were impossible that now were easy. And so that's when I started building our business as an AI native business. And if there's one business that's changing probably faster than the insurance industry, it's consulting, right? So what we did over there is we had to start with vision and belief. Vision and belief that this is going to be a fundamental change. And some of our much bigger competitors with 40,000, 200,000, 300,000 employees have got a far harder job on their plates to convince and take the people with them. But that has to be the starting point, and that's where we started. Experimentation and learning. So we're on our third generation of GPUs in our business on-premise. And that's in a 2-year period. And putting in our own sovereign AI capability. We deal with regulated data. We're not allowed to put a lot of that in the cloud. We sign agreements with our banking clients, etc., but we will not process that outside our premises. Physical AI infrastructure, the frontier API connectivity. We've got over 600 models available to our staff. We have 150,000 wrapped documents already. 10 billion tokens used. So we are some way down the track. We're moving as fast as we can. But it feels like breakneck, and yet it's not fast enough when we look at some of the events that are happening globally. And then that goes through to data, knowledge ontology, etc. A lot of the things that you will recognize. And so with all of that, my pitch today to you is possibly as a leader in your organization, a CEO or a CIO or an AI head, who is leading this journey on behalf of your organization. And again, looking back to look forward, I think there are things that we can learn. The first is that if you look at disruptive technologies, what's the first job of disruptive technology? It's to take business strategy and to translate that and enable that with technology strategy. Alignment has been the number one issue in IT strategy for as long as I've been involved in IT strategy, which is a long time now. And that alignment is to say technology needs to support the direction of the business. And CIOs have earned their seat at the table on that basis, right? But I think that with disruptive technology, there are opportunities that arrive through the technology. And that demands an entirely different role from a CIO and a CEO. It demands that you engage beyond technology and every facet of the business in order to take the business with you into those technology-enabled opportunities. And I think that if you are the person who's got the lucky or unlucky hat of taking AI forward in your business, your CEO has got a million fires that are burning, right? How are you making this available to them in a way that they are hearing the most important things and steering the business on an as fast as needed basis? And if you are that CEO, you are juggling that. And so I deal with those exec boards and at the top level in South Africa and globally. And typically it's a crowded agenda. People have just got too much on their plates. And when you talk about something like this, and it potentially changes everything, how do you actually create the space to have those conversations and take the organization with you? So you've heard a bit about from Microsoft what's coming, and there's cutting edge stuff there, so with co-work, and we'll get to co-work in a moment. Co-work was built in 10 days. 10 days, completely automated coding, right, by Anthropic. How many of you have launched a global product in 10 days with no human involvement? That was the first iteration of co-work that came out of Anthropic. We've heard from Sapiens about how the core system, or the so-called systems of record, are changing. And there's huge focus on what's happening to SaaS and the way forward for SaaS in an agentic and AI era. It is changing. So a lot that has to happen there. From ABSA, a bit about from the front lines and what the experience is over there. And my job is to try and figure out what does this mean for business, the business of insurance itself. Right, so I think that there are three big shifts. The first is value creation, claims and service economics, underwriting risk selection, intermediate productivity, client decision support. We just talked about many of those things, so you recognize those, right? And I think that in that space, AI potentially changes all of them. The difficulty of having a niche underwriting area when the information is now available broadly to everybody, and being able to develop underwriting profits based on insight and information changes when people have got the same technology as you and incredible insight. But it's also flipping around, and it's equipping your customers with the ability. And we had a brief discussion there about, is this a retail or commercial customer? I'd argue on the commercial customer it's probably even more difficult to keep up. Your commercial customer now has expert legal advice from AI sitting in their version of co-work, evaluating the policy that's being put in front of them, right? So one of the things that came out of Harvard a few months ago was just that don't think that technology is an advantage when everybody will ultimately have it. And that says that we have to keep up as fast as possible before we get left behind and disrupted. Then on the distribution and client ownership, if you look at AI-augmented customers, in the retail side, if you look at what happened with OpenClaw just a few weeks ago, OpenClaw was launched, and Jensen Huang has said that it is the most important software technology ever developed. He said that last week. Anybody not heard of OpenClaw? One or two hands, okay? So OpenClaw was released. It's a consumer-oriented product. It's an agent. And what it does is you install it on your PC or your Mac typically, and it has full access to everything. All of your Google data, etc. by default. That's changing a bit. They're dialing it back, and there's a bit of security in there. But just imagine that you have an agent now telling your customer, and this can apply again on the retail or the commercial side, you're paying too much on your premium. I've done a comparison. Would you like me to negotiate some rates? Right? And in the consumer side, that's very believable. On the commercial side, maybe it's more of a prompt. I deal a lot in banking. That's very real in the field of commercial banking, where you have lazy cash balances that fund pretty much the entire banking system. Lazy cash balances are under threat from agents who say, sweep the money outside overnight and I'll do it for you, right? So that type of behavior will come to insurance too. I think the other part is this is a compliance-driven industry. And I think the challenge is going to be for compliance to keep up. So somebody said something about good luck to the regulators, right, in terms of keeping up with this. If you look at that, that can also be an opportunity. I'm, again, old enough to remember when compliance was forced onto the intermediary channel, and as a result, in the UK and South Africa, they formed broker networks because of the costs of it, etc. I think we'll see some of that again, where individual brokers can't keep up with the technology. And so they will need to leverage off a technology or platform provided by the insurer. And that is an opportunity to increase the trust in the relationship and increase the amount of information sharing, etc., with all the challenges of who owns the information. The danger is if you get this wrong, you just become a balance sheet. That faces banking, that faces insurance. And so you don't want to be in a position where you are just balance sheet bidding for risk. Then the trust in the operating model. Hello? So with that, I think the Microsoft platform talks about embedding trust and authentication and visibility throughout the stack. And that is rare. So being able to have auditable information backwards to say what information was used is a POPI requirement, right? And so what was the system trained on? What was the model trained on? And how was it used? How did your broker or how did your intermediary make a decision and what information was made available to them? That becomes incredibly challenging when you have multiple levels of baked-in information at the intermediary advice level and all the way through the training of the model. So a huge challenge, I think, in terms of security, the access to information and the auditability. Also an opportunity. If you can provide compliance systems, people will gravitate towards you in order to make sure that they are guaranteed compliance. So this is not a technology issue. And this is not about, it's about where the intelligence sits and who owns the customer. And that is really both the threat and the opportunity. So one of the things which I think is very powerful is how many people have heard of harnesses in AI? Harnesses? One. Okay. So a harness is actually what's taken AI from being the model of ChatGPT 3.5 to being what you are seeing today, where you've got the scare trade disrupting entire industries. So when Anthropic released their legal skill, I think it was 2 weeks ago, the NASDAQ and the S&P instantly was billions were wiped out. We haven't seen that happen to the insurers yet, but I'd argue it's pretty close, right? And so what a harness is it is the skills and the knowledge that are put around a model, which give you more reproducible outputs and give that model a more deterministic outcome based on the inference. And that has been the secret to the jump in capability that we've seen. So we started with the model, and we've gone a long way, and potentially we're facing diminishing returns on the model. But what we are now seeing is we're seeing the impact of the scaffolding that is put around that. So that is things like memory, that is things like your tools that you make available to the AI, etc. And the documents, so Microsoft talked about the access to a document and make this an agent, etc. So it's that type of thing. And then the harness. The harness took one of the models from position number 30 in terms of capability to position number 5, right? And so the challenge over here, if you take this and you think of the harness type concept in the insurance industry and in your organization, is what is the imperative is your moat is your harness. The next thing that Anthropic has been working on has been the investment banking industry. And they've been working with Goldman Sachs, and they hired 40 investment bankers into their business. They've now released a product into the investment banking industry that has senior deal-making advice. And what Solomon has said has taken what was typically a 2-week deal prep exercise, valuation, etc., down to 10 minutes. Right? That is incredible IP that has now been invested in the harness that sits around the actual model capability. What is your harness? What is your IP? Satya Nadella said that people are being fast and loose about putting a lot of their IP out into models in the open domain. And sovereign AI is absolutely critical. And if you think of the insurance concept with all the information regulations and potentially developing this competitive advantage around harnesses, it's absolutely crucial that you start thinking about how you're embedding that harness that as your moat around that raw power of inference and AI underneath it. You've got to codify your institutional knowledge. This is not something where you just drop your knowledge into a model and you train up the model and it becomes an alternative, right? You have to get the information and the data into shape before it is usable in the AI sense. And I think that is something that most people have been slow at and takes a long time. So if you look at the possibly, one of the most bizarrely valued companies of all time, that is Palantir's speciality. Okay, Palantir takes data and creates intelligence. And it does that by making that data compatible with AI. Is your data compatible with AI? Is your IP and your information compatible with AI? And then prioritize model agnosticism, because models change radically. On my phone right now, I've got QN 3.5, which has got the equivalent capability to GPT 4.0 from just a year and a half ago. It's a 9 billion parameter model. It's available as open source for free, and it's on my phone. It's not in a data center somewhere. How are you going to keep up with the jumps in capability that underlie the intelligence that's being applied to your system? And then elevate human capital, because human capital sits above this. It sits above the harness. It's where hopefully we are moving from masses of clerical work. And I can remember in the early 2000s walking the halls and seeing masses of apps coming in and by trucks and being scanned into OCR systems, etc., and the people bustling around those. And I think that the world is changing, and we're moving on from masses of task-oriented work to much more intelligent work, and that requires leveraging up your human capital. So if you look at this, coding has been the catalyst. So if you look at these models, they are now developing themselves. AI is developing itself, and those of you familiar with the term the singularity is where self-improvement starts to take place. And if you trace the numbers, we're seeing the exponential effect that's happened since February 2006. The capability has taken off. So the other part of this is your job, if you are the influencer around AI or the CEO, etc., is to consider the second order effects. It's not just about how to apply AI in your organization. It is also about what AI is doing to the market around your organization, your customers, the society around that. And I'm not going to go through these in huge amounts of detail because most of them have been mentioned. Something simple is at the basic level is just AI legibility. Is your website, are your policies, are your contracts available in AI legible form? Because potentially they're going to be consumed through APIs. And if they're consumed by those basic APIs and then interpreted by AI, you want your information to be compatible with that process. So people are already saying that there is the death of the web. They're calling it, I think it's the lifeless internet, where websites will die and now just be text for AI to consume. And people will not be browsing your website to go through all the policy details, etc. They'll be directing an agent there to say, pull the information and give me the latest comparative data on that versus competitors. But that goes all the way through the chain. Is that AI legibility baked into your processes, how you deal with your clients and your intermediaries and your commercial customers? I think that there are some things that haven't been mentioned. There is also the analog backlash. Already we're seeing at the consumer and the society level, people are checking out and saying, I want nothing to do with this. I do not want a world with AI. And that is a profound effect because it can make your markets heterogeneous, where you have difficult, expensive to serve customers, and you have people who are completely AI native, but also within your organizations, where people working in your organizations are saying, I'm not interested, right? I'm sure you all recognize that. By far and away, I think the most difficult thing of AI is speed of disruption. The speed that this is happening is more important than the disruption itself. And the difficulty in coping with that speed is something which very few organizations are equipped for. Okay, so don't just be a technology influencer. Your role as an AI influencer is to look at the organizational context more broadly and start looking at what the AI impacts are on the broader society, the people in your organization, the market opportunities, etc. Don't just think of this as efficiency, and the market is really struggling with this right now. So one of the OpenAI execs and I were having a conversation about 2 weeks ago, and they were saying their predominant discussion with their customers is how to take out costs. And if you look at the value equation on reducing costs and improving margins is dwarfed by that from growth. And what are you doing with your AI to fundamentally change the growth trajectory of your business? Professor Andrew Ng has said that when you go from a home loan approval process of today to an approval process of 10 minutes, you don't just have a more efficient home loan, you have a different product. So how are you thinking about redesigning your product so that it is a different product and it is resulting in better business and more business? Some more from somebody else.
Now, my main message here is the following. this is a tsunami hitting the labor market. And even in the best prepared countries, I don't think we are prepared enough.
It is surprising to me that we are, in my view, so close to these models reaching the level of human intelligence, and yet there doesn't seem to be a wider recognition in society of what's about to happen. It's as if this tsunami is coming at us, and it's so close, we can see it on the horizon, and yet people are coming up with these explanations for, oh, it's not actually a tsunami, it's that's just a trick of the light, like it's some, and I think along with that, there hasn't been a public awareness of the risks.
I think that we're going to have a human level performance tasks. So white collar work where you're sitting down at a computer, either being, a lawyer or an accountant or a project manager or a marketing person. Most of those tasks will be fully automated by an AI within the next 12 to 18 months. And we can see this in software engineering. Many software engineers report that they are now using AI-assisted coding for the vast majority of their code production.
So, who's ready for full automation of every white-collar task in 12 to 18 months? I'm not sure if you believe that, I'm not sure if you can believe that, but certainly it's a provocative view, and it's from the head of AI in Microsoft, right? What do you do about this? Well, start by thinking differently. And I think that one of the experiments that I'm seeing a lot right now is there's a popular two phrases. One is steel manning. Steel manning is taking an argument you disagree with and trying and making it as strong as possible and living in that world for a moment. And that is very powerful when you're faced with discontinuous change, because it says, let me suspend disbelief. Let me live there for a while. And then thought experiments. So who saw the Centrini paper that went out 2 weeks ago and hit the stock market in the US? Two people, right? The Centrini paper was a provocative paper put out by an analyst firm, which looked back from 2028. It took billions of dollars off the US stock market. And what it said that fundamentally, look at friction. And it was looking back, it was a scenario, and they admitted that. And they said, this is just a scenario, but it's a thought experiment. Look back from 2028 and look at friction. AI will take out friction. And look at intermediation. It will disintermediate, right? And then they sketched a whole lot of scenarios. One of them was DoorDash, whose price crashed through the floor as a result, right? So it got an enormous response. And that was the beginning of the AI scare trade. I think what is useful and what most people recognize is, even if we disagree with that paper, live in that world for a moment and understand what the implications of that world might be. The other thing is flip the script. Cost efficiency, where are the opportunities to grow and attack? With everything, what's the opposite? Then organize for impact. I ran a corporate incubator in a previous life for a client once. I'd argue that this is the time to bring that kind of learning and capability back out, where you walk into an organization, you set up the processes, etc., and you bring order to the AI pilot case, right? How do you go through a structured process of running through AI in your organization on a prioritized basis, applying and delivering value? Most of the leading edge feedback coming out of the US in particular is that the day of letting 1,000 flowers bloom is over, right? We need value from AI now. The amounts of money that are being spent are so great that we need to be able to demonstrate value. And Graham, you showed that with the value uptick and let's hope they don't look. The evidence is required. There could also be M&A requirements, spin-ins, spin-outs, etc. A lot of that comes with a corporate incubation type mindset. I think the other part is portfolio approaches. VCs think about 1 in 5, 1 in 10 bets pay off. So I'm not sure what the exact ratio is going to have to be for AI, but you should be thinking about that too. What are those bets that are speculative, and which are those of the sure bets that you're absolutely putting yourself behind? And you're going to need a selection because of the uncertainty involved. Retool your people. Somebody said ways of working. It's one of my favorite sayings in this kind of space. I think you fundamentally have to look at how people are working and how AI changes that. Most people, 60% of people merely use AI as a search engine. 60%, right? 0.3% of the global world's population has tried coding with AI. That is the difference, the gulf. 16% of the world have been exposed to AI, and of that 75%, it's free AI. We are in the early stages. So when you look at that exponential curve, you have to imagine the tsunami coming behind that. And what Georgieva was talking about over there, she's saying that they estimate 60% of jobs in the developed markets will be impacted by AI, and 40% in developing markets. Are your people ready? Are your ways of working ready? Are you launching cultural work inside the organization as to how to get the most out of AI? Most of what we hear is, how do I prompt better? How do I prompt better to get what I want back from the chat bot, right? That's at the level of the person who actually has access for most of the people. There's also different ways of looking at this. China and the UAE have gone for a diffusion approach. A diffusion approach is where you make the technology widely available. The K-12 system in the UAE, which is basically grade 1 to grade 12, starts at grade 1 with AI training and exposure. China is also going for a diffusion approach. An OpenClaw that I mentioned earlier, Tencent offered a service where they put their tech staff on the pavement this last weekend. They had queues round the block of people coming from all over to help them configure their laptops, their PCs and their phones to use AI and to use OpenClaw, specifically OpenClaw, right? So diffusion is very different. It's saying, I'm going to push. But you also have to come in, I think, from the other side. And what Accenture, Microsoft, and some of the others are saying is, if you do not use AI, and we will track it, you will have diminished promotion prospects. So are you thinking about changing the HR processes in your organization? Are you thinking about your training processes, your onboarding processes? Because if you just throw in the technology, you are not going to be successful. I think that, the bottom line is really important as well, is that just many of your technology people and rapid application development and agile, possibly the time has come where that your previously RAD was something where you prototyped. Now you're in a world where you can prototype and launch within an accelerated period of time. So potentially the 10 days for co-work coming out of Anthropic, right? Without human intervention. So the head of Anthropic, Boris Cherny, has said he no longer codes. The head of development in Anthropic. It's now completely automated. And then build the engine, experiment relentlessly. I think there's a few points there that I'm going to raising the tail. We face the real prospect of dying under work slop, right? Work slop meaning work generated by AI. And again, you guys probably have exposure to AI and you use it in a good way. Many of the people in your organizations will use this just to generate anything, right? And then that increases the cognitive overload in other people in the organization who have to adjudicate it. I don't think as organizations we are ready for the avalanche of stuff coming out of AI. Microsoft, you showed us how quick it was under co-work to generate a memo, an email, etc. Right? So really look at the tail. The tail's the kill you here. And I think looking at the tail in every sense, the tail of your customers, the tail of your organization, lifting the tail is absolutely crucial. I think the other part is I have an alternative view. I think if we do see a crash, I think we could see token scarcity, token factoring, which is processing power, right? Because the funds will dry up. And if you do not have access to AI and it's been built into your core systems, and they now suddenly cannot get processing power to provide inference because it's sitting on some monthly API, you will not have the capability to actually run your core business. So sovereign AI and token accessibility, I think, is absolutely key. Even if we do not have a crash, I think that if you look at the usage graphs, the usage is taking off. And TSMC and ASML are fully booked until the end of 2027. There is no more capacity coming than what's being piped in right now. The machines just can't build it. Right, so the emerging picture of the perfect employee. There's only 3 things that I'm going to pull out of 10. The first is high agency. It's something when we discovered it, it was the word that resonated. It's the person that will take on a task and say, leave it to me, I'll get it done. That person, with the addition of AI, becomes a superhero. And it's probably the most important competency descriptor in the age of AI. The next one is learning agility. It's not about people who have been brought up in university with AI. Because guess what? We interview those people, often it's bad. They're not being educated in AI. And you take somebody on who's young and you expect them to bring AI thinking into the organization, two things: they probably don't have it, and secondly, they don't know your organization. So what you need is the high agency experienced person, possibly the person who ran your robo-advice pilot from 10, 15 years ago, who's now got AI to apply to the problem. That person will be a superhero. And then resilience. And resilience is a life lesson. And so resilience is somebody who can cope with change and cope with the fact that everything you did is now being invalidated, is something you've written off. And now you've got to start the next stage of the journey. Being able to move on and not be tied to the past is something that's really tough, and taking those knocks. So those three. And then there's a number of others. And you might say, when you look at all of these together, but that looks like just any perfect employee, never mind AI. And the thing about that is AI is merely an amplifier. AI is an amplifier for your people. Success will not be knowledge, it will be character. And have you got the character in your people to actually get the true advantage out of AI? So, 5 questions to finish. Where's the value created? Whoever owns the harness owns the value chain. Are you thinking about the harness? Be it your systems, be it the processes that you're building and codifying and ingesting AI into, etc. Who owns the harness? What is your harness? How should technology reshape the distribution? AI makes the broker relationship more important, right? And I think I heard that quite strongly today as well. But it does make it more difficult. And so how you deploy AI into that is really important. But how do you find those intelligence partners? Because I think the comment was made that the data, the information is shared. Which part of insurance must stay human-led? Automate the transactions, but hold the decisions, hold the judgment. That is a fundamentally human requirement. Are insurers building technology for efficiency or for clients? You can't do both. And one of the CEOs of an insurer that I once worked with, he was based on looking at cost cutting. He said, if you just look at it cost cutting, it's a disaster. Ground it in what you're doing for the customer. And it's the same is true for AI. Right, my 5th one is who owns the client? And the good news is that at the moment, nobody. Right? So that's the opportunity, is how do you use this moment to develop AI and systems that allow you to really grab ownership of the client. Thank you.